Previously in Shadows of the South.
Unsettling, opening their door late at night, asking to be allowed inside, refusing, standing outside.
There are stories about encounters that feel unsettling, not because of what happens, but because of what almost happens. Some individuals describe opening their door late at night to find children standing outside, speaking calmly, asking to be allowed inside. Yet something about their appearance creates an immediate sense that refusing may feel safer than offering help. They call them black-eyed children.
Shadows of the South.
Among modern urban legends, few narratives provoke such immediate discomfort as the reports involving entities commonly referred to as the black-eyed children. Unlike traditional ghost stories associated with abandoned locations or distant folklore, these accounts frequently occur in ordinary environments, often beginning with situations that initially appear harmless. The presence of children, typically associated with vulnerability and trust, creates an expectation of safety that is gradually disrupted as details emerge that contradict familiar social patterns. Descriptions of the encounters often share a consistent structure. Witnesses report noticing one or more children standing outside homes, near parked vehicles, or at the edge of dimly illuminated streets during evening or nighttime hours. The children are usually described as appearing between 6 and 14 years of age, dressed in clothing that does not immediately appear unusual, yet often lacks distinct characteristics that might indicate contemporary fashion trends. This ambiguity contributes to the sense that something about their appearance is slightly disconnected from the surrounding environment. The defining feature, however, is the eyes themselves. Witnesses consistently describe eyes appearing entirely black, lacking visible sclera or iris, creating a visual impression that resists ordinary explanation. This detail, often recognized only after prolonged observation, intensifies the emotional response associated with the encounter. The absence of expected visual structure within the eyes disrupts instinctive social cues, typically used to interpret intention, producing uncertainty regarding the nature of the interaction. Reports involving the black-eyed children frequently begin with a request. The children are often described as asking for permission to enter a home, vehicle, or other enclosed space. The language used is typically calm and polite, lacking overt threat or urgency. Yet witnesses frequently report experiencing an immediate hesitation that seems disproportionate to the apparent simplicity of the request. This hesitation is often attributed to an intuitive sense that something about the situation feels inconsistent with normal expectations of spontaneous interaction. In many accounts, the children appear persistent without becoming aggressive. Their requests are repeated in a manner that suggests anticipation of compliance, yet the absence of emotional variation within their tone creates an impression of detachment rather than genuine need. The interaction often continues for several moments, during which the observer attempts to reconcile the desire to respond compassionately with the simultaneous perception that the situation contains elements that cannot be easily explained. Witnesses frequently report difficulty maintaining prolonged eye contact once the appearance of the eyes becomes fully visible. The visual anomaly interrupts the feedback mechanisms typically used to interpret emotional expression, creating an experience in which the observer cannot confidently assess intention. The resulting ambiguity prolongs cognitive engagement with the encounter, increasing the likelihood that the memory will persist as a source of reflection long after the interaction concludes. One of the most notable aspects of the black-eyed children narrative is the consistency of descriptive details across accounts shared by individuals who appear to have no direct connection with one another. Although variations exist, many testimonies emphasize similar behavioral characteristics, including calm speech patterns, controlled body language, and a tendency to remain positioned near thresholds separating interior and exterior spaces. The symbolic significance of these transitional boundaries contributes to the interpretive depth of the story, as thresholds often represent moments of decision associated with acceptance or refusal. The children are frequently described as displaying an unusual degree of patience, remaining present without exhibiting signs of frustration or emotional fluctuation. This behavioral stability contrasts with expectations typically associated with children, whose communication patterns often include spontaneous variation reflecting emotional state. The absence of such variation reinforces the perception that the interaction does not align with familiar social frameworks. Some witnesses describe experiencing physiological responses, such as elevated heart rate or a general sensation of discomfort without identifiable cause. These reactions may reflect cognitive processes involved in evaluating situations characterized by incomplete information. The mind's attempt to reconcile conflicting signals can produce heightened awareness, increasing sensitivity to subtle irregularities that might otherwise remain unnoticed. From a psychological perspective, the black-eyed children narrative illustrates how minimal deviations from expected social patterns can generate significant emotional impact. Human interaction relies heavily on the interpretation of facial features, particularly the eyes, as indicators of intention and emotional state. The absence of recognizable structure within the eyes disrupts this interpretive process, reducing the observer's ability to anticipate behavior based on established cognitive models. The request for permission to enter enclosed spaces introduces an additional symbolic dimension. Enclosed environments often represent safety and personal control, making the decision to grant or deny access psychologically meaningful. The narrative's emphasis on voluntary invitation suggests awareness of social norms governing hospitality and trust, highlighting the tension between empathy and caution when confronted with ambiguous circumstances. Some interpretations propose that the story resonates because it reflects broader concerns regarding vulnerability in situations where social expectations may conflict with intuitive perception. The presence of children intensifies this conflict, as cultural norms typically encourage protective responses toward individuals perceived as needing assistance. By introducing elements that challenge these norms, the narrative creates a scenario in which the observer must evaluate competing motivations without clear guidance regarding appropriate action. As the story has circulated through digital platforms, variations have emerged that expand upon the central narrative while preserving its essential structure. Some accounts describe encounters occurring in parking areas late at night, where individuals sitting inside vehicles notice children approaching from distances not immediately visible. Others involve reports of children appearing at doorsteps during periods of low activity, increasing the contrast between ordinary domestic environments and unexpected social interaction. In certain versions, witnesses describe feeling compelled to avoid direct eye contact, interpreting the visual anomaly as an implicit indication that continued observation may intensify discomfort. The resulting behavior often involves polite refusal, accompanied by efforts to disengage from the interaction without provoking escalation. The absence of aggressive response from the children contributes to the unresolved nature of the encounter, leaving the observer uncertain whether the decision to refuse entry prevented an unknown outcome. The adaptability of the narrative allows it to remain relevant within changing cultural contexts. As communication technologies enable rapid sharing of personal experiences, the story continues to evolve through collective reinterpretation. The persistence of recognizable structural elements across variations reinforces the perception that the narrative functions as a symbolic expression of shared psychological sensitivity to unfamiliar social signals. The black-eyed children occupy a position within modern folklore, defined by the blending of ordinary environmental settings with minimal deviations capable of generating sustained emotional impact. Unlike traditional myths associated with distant historical periods, this narrative is situated within contemporary contexts, increasing the likelihood that individuals can imagine encountering similar situations within their own environments. The accessibility of the story contributes to its persistence, as the scenario requires no specialized knowledge of supernatural systems in order to produce interpretive engagement. The simplicity of the interaction allows listeners to project themselves into the situation, evaluating how they might respond when confronted with similar ambiguity. This participatory dimension strengthens the narrative's capacity to remain memorable, even when approached from skeptical perspectives. Researchers examining contemporary myth formation often observe that stories involving subtle distortion of familiar social roles tend to produce strong cognitive engagement. By presenting figures that appear outwardly ordinary, yet resist conventional interpretation, the narrative encourages reflection on the reliability of perceptual processes used to evaluate environmental safety. The enduring influence of the black-eyed children legend demonstrates how narratives built upon minimal deviation from ordinary experience can generate lasting psychological resonance. The absence of overt threat allows the story to operate within a space defined by uncertainty, where interpretation remains open rather than predetermined. This ambiguity contributes significantly to the narrative's persistence, as unresolved questions tend to maintain cognitive presence longer than scenarios providing definitive explanation. Whether interpreted as symbolic exploration of trust, cautionary tale regarding vulnerability, or imaginative construction reflecting contemporary anxieties, the story continues to circulate because it engages fundamental processes involved in evaluating unfamiliar social situations. The image of children requesting entry while displaying characteristics that disrupt expected patterns of communication creates a tension that encourages reflection on how individuals balance empathy with instinctive caution. And perhaps that is why the narrative remains compelling, not because it provides evidence of supernatural presence, but because it illustrates how easily ordinary environments can become sources of uncertainty when subtle details challenge assumptions that normally allow social interaction to feel predictable.
Next episode in Shadows of the South.
Unpredictable ways, something massive, dense vegetation, footsteps, a strong odor.